Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today's video is all about money mistakes I've made. So it's all well and good me making a personal finance and life advice channel. But on reflection, how do you know to trust me and how do you know that I actually know what I'm talking about in any way whatsoever? Now, I don't claim to be some finance guru or that everything I do is perfect or that I know exactly how to manage your own personal finances, because at the end of the day, they're personal finances, and what I do and what works for me might not work for you. But I just wanted to talk to you guys about a few of the mistakes that I've actually made in my life so far, albeit a short life because I'm only 23 years old. But mistakes that I've learned from and I've started correcting, and that I think a lot of people out there might actually be able to learn from because they might be making the same mistakes as well. These bad mistakes and habits have come about for several reasons, but one of the key ones was that I had no financial literacy up until 2 or 3 years ago. I was always interested in money and found it fascinating and always thought the idea of maybe running a company one day would be really cool. But I never took the time to actually research how finances work and how you can actually use your own personal finances to increase your worth over time, rather than just going through life knowing that I had some money in a bank account and that I could spend it until there was none left or until I hit the end of my overdraft. So over the last few years, I started educating myself financially by reading as much as I can and studying as much as I can on different prospects and different understandings and applications of finance. And the culmination of that is essentially this YouTube channel and a summary of the things that I've learned and how I've put them into action. Now, firstly, one of the key mistakes that I personally made was the fact that I never had a high interest savings account, or I never put my money in a high interest account. I actually went through the entirety of my childhood and my university time putting all of my money into a 0.1% return interest rate account, which is absolutely woeful. I mean, I literally put nothing into high interest savings accounts. I didn't invest anything in the stock market. Literally all of my money just went into my bank account and sat there until I needed to spend it. Now, this gave me the illusion that I had a lot of money because obviously it's all in one place. But actually, each time I wasn't putting money into a high interest savings account, over time that money is just losing its value, because if you're not beating the inflation rate for that year, technically the same amount of money at the start of the year is worth 1 to 2% less on average by the end of the year. So one thing that I've started doing now is habitually taking my money as soon as I get my paycheck and processing it immediately and sending part of it into an investment ISA, and then part of it goes into a high interest savings account. So that's the first mistake that I'd made, is that I'd never made use of high interest savings accounts or investment accounts that you can use to increase the value of your money over time, rather than just relying on keeping it in a current account and using a debit card for all of your purchases. Now that leads on to the second thing, which is that until very recently, I actually only had a debit card. So by the time I turned 23 years old, I only had a debit card. I'd never got a credit card. Now you may think this is great because it means you would have avoided credit card debt. But actually, it means that I haven't been able to build my credit score. So if I'm looking to buy a house in the near future, then the number of mortgages that I can get approved on and the value of those mortgages and the interest rates on those mortgages is just not going to be as good as it could have been had I taken the time to actually invest and get a credit card and use the credit card. So this is one thing that I think is actually the best birthday gift you can give an 18-year-old, apart from general financial literacy, is to get them a credit card with a relatively low spending limit, say £1,000, and make sure that they're paying 10 to 20% of that limit off every month. So get them to spend £100 or £200 a month on their credit card and get them to pay it off in full at the end of each month so that they're not incurring any credit card debt. So this will really build their credit score and put them in a way better position than a lot of young people, because a lot of young people just won't get a credit card because we're not told that it's actually something that's really useful and that building credit score is something that's invaluable for later in life. Now the next mistake that I made, and this is a big one, makes for a fantastic Instagram feed and a slightly more woeful bank account situation. So I'm half French. I grew up with family living in France. So throughout my childhood, I grew accustomed to 2 or 3 holidays to the south of France in the summer and over Christmas and in any of the other holidays at school or during the calendar time. Now while this was lovely and I had a load of fantastic experiences, the one thing that was never really explained to me was the only reason that my parents did this and were able to afford this for so many years is the fact that these holidays were massively cheaper because we had family that we were staying with, so you didn't have to pay for the accommodation costs and things like this. And it was never really explained to me by anyone, not just my parents, so I'm not going to put the blame on them. The fact that when you're young, holidays don't need to be this big, extravagant, fantastic situation. And so I'd got used to quite nice holidays and going, abroad on your holidays and having a great time and going out for all your meals and enjoying the area that you go to. But actually, when you're young, You can't really afford to do these huge holidays all the time, and that's something that I learned in a very harsh way, which is when I got my first job and my first real paycheck. So when I went to uni and I earned my first paycheck on my placement year, I did what I'd always done throughout my childhood, which is I spent on a nice holiday, and I ended up actually spending across the year well over £2,500 of my paycheck just on holidays, which is an absolutely astronomical sum. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of money for somebody who at 22 years old is spending on holidays. So on reflection, as much as the holidays were fantastic, and I do feel that I had a great time, really that money could have been much better spent investing into my ISAs, or for example using it to pay off and build up credit scores on different things. So this is something that I think we need to make young people aware of, is the fact that holidays don't need to be these fantastic abroad holidays that everybody goes on. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this. You can find really cheap holidays abroad, but you have to be wary that doing these holidays, it's that opportunity cost. You could be using that money elsewhere and investing it elsewhere. And without the education to know how to invest it elsewhere or what to do, I turned to the default and just used my money for holidays and got to the end of my placement year without having saved any of the salary that I was paid. Now, yes, of course, £2,000 on holidays isn't going to account for the full expenditure of my £14,000 salary, but the main mistake that I have made so far, which is one that I don't really regret because I had a fantastic time, but the main mistake that I've made so far is that I got my first paycheck and I spent it on a nice car. So I went out and bought myself a BMW Z4. Now, this was an absolutely lovely car. It looked gorgeous, it drove fantastically, it really was incredible. It was by far the nicest car out of all of my friends at the time, and it felt good to have a car like that. But the main issue being that it was really impractical. The fuel costs were an absolute nightmare. I was spending around £300 a month just on fuel, which was almost as much as my rent at the time. And as much as it was great to have this car, every time something went wrong with it, it cost a ridiculous amount of money. If I got a puncture in a tyre, it was £180 to replace that tyre because they were large, run-flat, low-profile tyres. On top of that, if the brakes went, the brakes were £200 each side, so £400 to get the full set of brakes changed and discs. I mean, it really was really expensive to run this car, and I calculated going back through everything. On top of the general maintenance costs, there were also the other costs like insurance and tax. The tax was £350 a year, and the insurance was around the £1,000 mark per year for the 2 years that I owned the car. So I ended up spending a lot of money maintaining and driving this car. And actually, when I added up all of the costs in total, on top of the value of the car, I ended up spending roughly £15,000 to £16,000 over a space of 2 years driving and maintaining this car as well as purchasing this car. So when I sold the car eventually earlier this year for just over £7,000, it may have felt like I only lost £2,000 on the value of the car from when I bought it, but actually in total I will have lost around about £8,000 or £9,000 just from having to maintain the car. Now, on top of that, if you add in the opportunity cost of what I could have done with the money instead of buying that car, that's when it becomes really expensive, because I could have invested all that money. That could have been cash I had to save up, which I could have invested when the stock market crashed due to coronavirus, and I would have seen an absolutely huge return. But instead, I just didn't have that cash available to be able to invest at that point in time. So yes, I would say having a flash car looks great, and I don't really regret owning the car because I did have a lot of fantastic memories with that car. I went on some incredible drives and I had a lot of fun. But at the same time, if I could go back and do it again, I probably wouldn't buy that car again. I would buy myself a cheaper little runaround car because it was way cheaper to run and maintain, and I would have saved myself a fortune over the space of the year. So those are the main financial mistakes that I've made, and I do think that you can learn from them because they are things that a lot of people make. A lot of people get their first paycheck and they go on a really extravagant holiday, or they get their first paycheck and they immediately go out and finance the dream car they always wanted. But the key cost to those things is not just obviously the cost of the item itself that you've purchased, but the opportunity cost in what you could have invested in instead. And I always think back and think, if I had a bit more money because I hadn't bought my car, or I hadn't been on so many holidays, then when the stock market crashed due to coronavirus, I would have had a lot more money to invest, but unfortunately I just didn't have the cash to invest. So that's my main thing that I would advise people is, I wouldn't go out and spend your first paycheck on a really flash car, and I certainly wouldn't go out and spend it all on holidays. Because those are two things that take away opportunities for you to invest in other aspects of life, which may give you a better return. So yes, as I said, these are the biggest financial mistakes I've made, and I am learning from them and forming new habits. Now, that doesn't mean by any means that I'm perfect, and I'm sure there are plenty of things I've done since which I've spent way too much money on and haven't been the right investment to make, but I'm trying to progress and trying to learn from these mistakes. And I think that's all we can do as people, is try and learn from the different financial mistakes we make and the different life mistakes we make to improve our situations and improve ourselves. So let me know what financial mistakes you've made and what advice you would give to yourself or your younger self if you were to make those same decisions again that led to those mistakes. Let me know, of course, in the comment section down below what you thought of the video, and don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new around here. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.